Hello YouTube vintage cassette stereo fans. I've put together this Panasonic top loader. This is part 3, final part. And I'm going to talk a little bit about tapes, bias, adjustments that are very common on these. I have a lot of experience with car stereo tape decks because I worked in a car stereo shop. But we also did home stereo as well. But that is somewhat relevant to today. I think the most important thing today is to get it working reliably and sounding good. Because remember the old axiom, if it sounds good, it is good. I still have some of my tapes that I condensed them down into this smaller case. I used to have a large case that would be in the back, in the trunk of my 69 Chrysler Newport, and then later cars, my 72 Marquis, then I bought a Honda Civic, then I had a Toyota pickup truck, and I always had, it was through several cars, the Cordoba, and some of those tapes are here. Some of them have been re-recorded, some of them have what's on them. This FM National Slash tape, I never used to write the songs down. I used to just put a hunk of paper there, what I wrote, but I think that one was recorded around 87 or 88. It still sounds good. And why does it sound good? Well, this is a really good tape. It's a Bass Chrome Extra. Excellent tape. Other tapes that are excellent, and I found most people back in the, let's say the 80s, during the height of this stuff, used Maxell XL2 90s. Sometimes the 100 minutes weren't quite as good. This is kind of, so this is in the CD arena. This is when CDs started to come out, so CDs had a few extra songs on them. What's important is this is a made in Japan Maxell. These are one of the good ones. But it's not actually chromium dioxide, it's cobalt ferric oxide, something like that. But for most decks, the playback will sound good in the CRO2 position. On this deck, this tape select only affects playback and record to a certain extent. Bias in record, of course, and playback is just a capacitor that cuts the highs off. Not much to it. Other more elaborate decks, like the one this was recorded on, had an external, this is a home deck, had an external control for bias, that for both recording and playback. How relevant is all this? Well, you could actually fine-tune this for the bias and the sound of the tapes that you use. So if all your tapes are these and they're in good shape, and this is how I ended up with this test tape, you record everything on the same kind of tape and you want everything to sound similar. And it's on the same system with the same cartridge, because there's so many variables here. You can actually do a few samples with the deck. Take the lid of the deck off if it's a front loader, the bottom if it's a top loader, and slowly rotate the control, like every 10 seconds change it, and then play that segment back and listen to how it sounds. You're going by ear. Back in the day, when stuff like this was new, we service L-Page, Alpine, Luxman, Sony, Techniques decks, lots of those, Kenwood decks, and usually the manufacturers, we were doing the warranty work, gave us test tapes. Alpine actually gave one that actually had a tachometer on it. I've never seen one since, and I didn't keep it. One of the other techs has it. It would actually show the speed. You had to have it under like a light running at 60 hertz, of course, which is most of them. And you could line up the marks, and if they were still, it was at 1 7/8 inches per second. So you could tweak the speed. Most of us that worked on these, we tweaked them by ear. Or in the case of a test tape, like this one has tones on it, 500, 1000, 2000, 3000, 4000. This was recorded with a TIAC V5 RX, which was a 3-motor deck, excellent deck. recorded quite a few years ago, over 30 years ago. And I found that one was matched well to almost everything that went through the shop. And we ended up in a bit of a battle. Everybody had their own test tapes, everybody had their own mixtapes, and of course that was the thing, right? I gotta read you some of the titles here. FM, Nash the Slash, Jeff Healey, Bromberg, B.B. King, J.J. Cale, Eric Clapton, Jerky Boys, Weird Al, Burt Bacharach. I had Burt Bacharach because some people didn't like listening to rock. Kiss, Toto, Charity Brown, Jerry Rafferty, Paul Anka, AC/DC, Ozzy, T-Rex, and Dio. These tapes are all survivors. And so that was kind of my test collection. If I put a stereo in a car or serviced it and wanted to demo it to the customer, I'd pick one of these. I'd say, what would you like? And sometimes they had their own tapes. As far as pre-recorded tapes that you buy from a store, they're kind of fun to listen to, but they don't stand up. And there's still quite a few around. I see them at the thrift stores. I used to have a friend of mine that would tweak the azimuth on his deck. So on this deck, there's 2 screws on either side of the head. One holds the head to the piece of metal that moves. The other tweaks it this way. So the tape's traveling like this, and it adjusts the head like this. And as you adjust it, the best spot will give you the same level of sound on both channels and the best highs. And one of my friends used to always tweak it to, he'd get a pre-recorded tape and put it and go, oh, that tape sounds like, and go in and adjust it for the tape. That's kind of like, well, it's not a bad idea on those. If you recorded all your own tapes on the same machine and kept it clean and running, you don't need to do that. In fact, like this one, it has the original paint on the azimuth screw. I'm not turning it unless it sounds bad. I've learned, because sometimes they strip, sometimes they break. But my test tapes, and I've run a few of this, sound really good on here. They have great highs in both channels. I did a sample recording just from a tuner I have over here, played it back, and what I find is I set the level so it was around the 5 to 3 on the VU meter, and it played back around there. So the levels are right. The levels on my old tapes were in that same range. You don't want to peak too far, you saturate the tape. You can go on and on about this. We used to actually use an oscilloscope, a test tape, a tone generator, and it got kind of bad because people were taking decks home that had been serviced, and they'd say, my tapes don't sound right since you worked on it. And then there was a couple of test tapes, I think they came from Sony, that eventually we figured out, hey wait, these aren't right. They're actually setting the azimuth off these is throwing these decks out for whatever reason. The speed was right, but the azimuth was wrong. So I had to throw those out, and I made my own, and it was based on several weeks, several decks, different music, recording different bias levels, playing back different bias levels, trying Fuji tapes, trying Maxell tapes, even stuff like these. I used to have a whole bunch of these. A Maxell Studio MS-90s, excellent tape. And what was that other one? I got a bunch from Kmart. These ProTech Chrome. And these actually smell like crayons. That's a real chromium dioxide tape. These were sent, like they're in a blister pack of 3 at Kmart in the early 80s. And they're actually really excellent tapes. They've stood up. So, if it's playing back at the right speed and it sounds right, okay? Otherwise, you could buy a test tape and set it up that way. If it's even, at this point, something this old, if you can get it so it sounds right with the tapes you have and it records well and they match the tapes you have, that's all you need to do. There is no perfect, optimum, exact point with a measurement on a scope that these have to be at. It just has to sound good. I know it sounds like if you want to spend hours and hours going through, there are actually, you can find documentation on factory service, and some of it is so silly, playing tones and tracking them and making a graph and all this stuff. Some of it's just so silly it makes no sense. You'd be spending hours on this stuff. But this one actually, I'm not going to play any music because of copyrights, but this is a very nice operating deck. I always operate with this open, okay? I like to see the tape turning. And as you can see, this one, this was recorded with the V5RX like 35 or 40 years ago, and it's still holding, like, it's still magnetized to the point it was the day I recorded it. It's at 0 VU. And this thing runs smoothly and nicely. One thing I find, it just sounds better in the normal position on playback. Fast forward is zippy. Counter works. Rewind really moves along. Okay, and this is something I was having a little issue with, and I'll show you. So we just need to go back a hair. The auto stop was stuck. Let's see if it works. So we're at the end of side B. Yeah, and what it was is there's a piece, there's an arm that goes through this hole, and when the tape tenses up, when it reaches the end, it pushes the arm, which puts a lever onto a cam, which overrides the control, the play control. There's another, it moves a cam, a wheel, and another cam. And it was just stuck from years and not being used. It's kind of important because sometimes you fall asleep while you're listening and thing could be sitting there for hours going, burning out the rubber. Anyway, that's all I want to say about this one. If you have any questions about setting up cassette decks and stuff, they are on a comeback. That's all I can say. Here's a piece of advice I can give you on cassette decks, okay, for what it's worth. Don't pay a lot for them. And here's what I mean. I look online and I see stuff. I was looking for another V5RX. I was actually looking at an Akamichi Dragon because I've had two of those, both somewhat problematic decks, but nice sounding decks. And the prices were absolutely crazy. We're talking like $400 and $500 plus shipping and all this. Okay, this deck was $50. I haven't even wiped the case off. That's how nice it is. And I have original manuals with it. And it didn't take too much. I'm serious, like, don't spend a lot to buy the deck. Even the ones that say everything's working okay and it's had belts replaced and stuff, a few days down the line you could be sitting there with a deck that is eating tapes or not playing right. I actually bought, I'm trying to think what it was. It was one of the M series Techniques with the Sendust head, MX head I think it's called. And I paid a little bit of a premium, this is a few years ago, online. Techniques M215, I believe I did a video on it. I paid $10 for that deck. It was pretty dirty, it has some issues, it needed belts. I ended up, it was more time than money going into it, but those have such a good head. The MX head is fantastic. These just have a standard Sendust head, and do you know what? It sounds great. So anyway, thanks for watching and listening.